As the number of COVID-19 cases goes up in the United States, President Trump's approval and odds of being re-elected are going down. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. We're less than 4 months away from the U.S. presidential election, and so far, President Donald Trump faces a bleak outlook for his re-election bid. Polls are predicting a victory for the Democratic rival and former Vice President Joe Biden. For more, let's turn now to CGTN's Jim Spellman, who's at the White House. Jim, great to see you. Jim, one of the reasons that President Trump might not be re-elected is his response to the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, I was looking at a poll, and it shows that 67% of Americans disapprove of his handling of the pandemic. Now, today, Friday, the president traveled to Florida, a state which is seeing a spike in cases. What's he been talking about?
Yeah, that's right. It seems like lately President Trump would like to talk about anything but COVID-19. He traveled to South Florida on Friday, an area of the country where a third of COVID-19 tests are coming back positive and where hospitalizations are soaring. That in Florida and other hotspots, some of these areas are moving backwards with reopening. They're closing bars again. They're closing indoor dining again. The Harvard Global Health Institute says 5 states should immediately completely shut down once again, and more than a dozen others should be ready to make that move if things don't improve rapidly. Dr. Anthony Fauci, top doctor on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, knows that won't be an easy sell, but he says it has to be on the table. Listen.
I would hope we don't have to resort to shutdown. I think that would be something that is obviously an extreme. I think it would not be viewed very, very favorably, even by the states and the cities involved. So rather than think in terms of reverting back down to a complete shutdown, I would think we need to get the states pausing in their opening process, looking at what did not work well, and try to mitigate that.
But President Trump didn't travel to hard-hit South Florida to lay out a plan for responding to COVID-19 or to meet with frontline workers or victims, patients who are suffering from COVID-19. He went to talk about U.S. efforts against drug smuggling. He met with supporters of the Venezuelan opposition. He attended 2 fundraisers, and he even managed to make a short trip to his Doral Golf Club down there in South Florida. Anand?
So, Jim, what is the Trump campaign strategy here? I mean, how do they move ahead from this?
Well, they really want to get some excitement going here. You recall last month, they tried to do that by holding an indoor rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was a big disappointment. Only about a third full indoors. They didn't get the overflow crowd they expected afterwards. They had planned to do another rally tomorrow, Saturday, in New Hampshire. They've now canceled that, blaming it on a storm coming, but it was unclear what kind of crowd they were going to draw to that. So they haven't been able to get that type of campaign going on that would resemble the Trump campaign from 4 years ago. So they've tried to talk about other issues. This week they tried to tout the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. We've heard President Trump take on these sort of culture war issues like the Civil War statues. But I think it's becoming clear that until COVID-19 is in better shape here in the United States, that will be the top topic on this campaign, Anand.
Thanks, Jim. That's CGTN's Jim Spellman talking to us from the White House. Well, let's get to our panel right now. John Sitilides is Principal and Geopolitical Strategist at Trilogy Advisors. He joins us right here in Washington, D.C. Also from D.C. via Skype, Hamza Khan is a Democratic strategist and founder of the Pluralism Project. Paulo Sotero is a journalist and distinguished fellow of the Brazil Institute at the Wilson Center. He's joining us via Skype from Maryland. And from New York, Thanos Dimadis is the president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the United States. Thank you to all of you for joining us. And John, let me start with you. You know, those poll numbers can't be good news for the Trump campaign, but we should point out that we are 4 months away from the election. That's a lifetime in politics. Nothing is certain right now. But what, in your view, would it take for President Trump to turn those numbers around?
Well, let me first underscore how accurate you are, Anand, that we are very far away from Election Day. 4 months is very much an eternity. And we're also dealing with a very unusual and perhaps unprecedented landscape of multiple crises with a global pandemic, a deep economic recession, and we have civil unrest in the streets of America. All this having been said, I think the single most important trajectory issue for Donald Trump come September is going to be where the economy is headed. And what does that trajectory look like? Is it going to be a flat line after what have been several good months in May, June, and so far the first week of July? Is it going to be a rocket-like trajectory? And really, what is the mood of the country? Because I think one of the most important statistics today is that about 65% of Americans feel that we're on the wrong track. That's deadly for an incumbent. If he can turn that around and get that below 50% and people feel that we're on the right track come September, I think it bodes very well for him.
There are so many new things in what we're hearing about the election, John. I mean, if we look at the dynamics of the election, I mean, something that's really a little bit difficult to comprehend is how come Joe Biden has taken a lead in the polls? You know, he's done little or no campaigning.
Well, first of all, we're dealing with a very unique media landscape which is about 90 to 95% hostile against the incumbent. That's certainly shaping opinions. I think there's also a sense of exhaustion because so much of everyday life in America is centered around where one stands regarding Donald Trump. Are you with him or are you against him? We almost don't have normal conversations in America anymore because we're riven by people's sentiments about Donald Trump. And I think also there is this sense that right now there's a bewilderment, a sense of disorientation in America, and that falls at the president's feet. That's the way it is in any election cycle. But if the president can say, I'm the one to rebuild the economy, I'm the one who can turn this around, and look at my record based on what he hopes will be a strong economic recovery in September, then he'll get the credit for that.
All right, let me bring in Hamza Khan. Hamza, let me get your view on this. Joe Biden released his program this week. It included, among other things, reviving the United States economy. He also said that if he becomes president, he will require federal agencies to buy American. Well, after releasing that report, President Trump responded to it. This is what the president had to say. Let's listen.
He plagiarized from me, but he can never pull it off. He likes plagiarizing. It's a plan that it's very radical left, but he said the right things because he's copying what I've done.
So, Hamza, does the president have a point there? I mean, these proposals that we see in that report, they're not altogether original, are they?
I think that every administration going back to probably the founding of the country has tried to buy American and shore up American industries. That's one of the reasons why we cannot put any excises on exports from the United States going out. We have a tradition of wanting to support our own industries, which I think is true about any country in the world. I don't really think at this point in time we can say that Joe Biden is plagiarizing as much as he's simply doing what any patriotic American should do, which is to buy American and support American industry.
But do you think, Hamza, there was a lost opportunity here that at least Vice President Joe Biden could have come out with something more, something that would excite voters in the country?
I think the thing that will most excite voters in this country is to make sure that this pandemic is behind us and no more innocent lives are lost. Just recently, I lost my own uncle to COVID-19, so I'm not really sure if I myself am in a position to want to be jumping up for joy as much as I want to put the past behind us and build a country that's on solid foundation. Donald Trump is a candidate who likes to make big promises and then under-deliver. I'm sure many of his girlfriends can probably share that sentiment about him. But coming back to the point here, I think that Joe Biden didn't lose any opportunity. He's done a very good job so far, and I think that we're on the right track when it comes to his campaign.
Thanos, Dimadis, you know, American elections are always followed very closely around the world, but I'm wondering how closely this election at this stage is being followed in Europe, given that, you know, Europe together with other countries, European countries rather, with other countries around the world are also dealing with the coronavirus pandemic as well as economic challenges. What kind of reporting are you seeing?
Yes, I think that European countries and all other partners of the United States are trying to avoid what and how the United States have been handling this corona crisis. I think that the United States so far have been setting up a good example of how, you know, they are managing leadership affairs, but after the virus, the United States has been a case to avoid on behalf of the European leaders. First of all, I don't think that this virus crisis is going to end up anytime soon. I think that this is a crisis that, of course, Donald Trump is trying to put under the carpet and make Americans to forget that this crisis exists. However, while we're seeing human lives being lost, I think that President Trump is getting in a much worse situation politically. He's trying to politicize the whole situation, and he's trying to take some political advantage. And I don't think that this is a case of how to manage the crisis. And Europeans, I would say that they see the way that Trump is trying to politicize this situation. They know that Trump is behind 4 months from the elections right now. And of course, the main priority for the American president is to make the economy be on track. However, when we have human lives being lost every day, this is not going to happen, because this cannot be the main point of the political dialogue. And of course, the American economy is also independent on how the virus crisis is being handled by the American leadership. But so far, the United States is far from doing great on this stage. European partners are very concerned in regards to how the American leadership is handling this crisis.
Paulo Sotero, this election that is coming up in November, it of course poses some unprecedented challenges which have been brought on by the pandemic. There's a strong push by Democrats, for instance, for mail-in ballots. This could lead to challenges by the Trump campaign. We know President Trump is not in favor of mail-in ballots. He said that it gives people an opportunity to commit fraud. There is counting, of course. It could take days before we know the result of the election. What are the risks you see in this upcoming election, just structural risks?
Well, you know, from the perspective of Brazil, particularly, what is at stake here is really the stability of the current presidency in Brazil. Mr. Jair Bolsonaro has President Trump as his idol, and well, he followed the lead, denying science evidence, scientific evidence about the virus. Brazil has now the second largest number of infected people, 1.9 million, 70,000 people dead already, and projections are that this could double or even triple. It is being perceived in Brazil, where Mr. Bolsonaro is very isolated, as a failure of leadership in Brazil and obviously in the United States. And the consequences for Brazil specifically is that, assuming that the polls are right, the Brazilian president will be completely isolated after November, after Trump's defeat, if that comes to pass. Otherwise, it's enormous suffering, enormous economic losses for Brazil also, a country that has been going through a series of crises. GDP should shrink at least 10% this year. Bolsonaro does not have the competence to govern. His government is basically not viable at this point. No minister of health for 3 months, no minister of education, no sense of direction or leadership.
John Sitilides, Joe Biden has been scathing in his criticism of the way in which President Trump has handled the coronavirus pandemic. Let's listen to him.
And when it comes to COVID-19, after months of doing nothing other than predicting the virus would disappear, or maybe if you drank bleach, you may be okay, Trump has simply given up. He's waved the white flag. He's walked away. And his failures come with a terrible human cost and deep economic toll.
John, is that criticism fair? Has the president given up?
if I were Joe Biden or his campaign manager, I would take that exact same track, right? The idea is to depress the vote for Donald Trump as much as possible and give Americans the sense that he has failed completely as a leader on COVID, on the economy, and on every other issue that he can possibly list. I think it's very unfair in some ways because President Trump was harshly criticized by Joe Biden and a number of Democratic leaders and media figures in late January when he shut down travel from China to the United States because he was afraid that Chinese carriers of the virus would contaminate Americans. And then there were a number of steps that were taken in February, but he was also relying on the advice of experts like Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who didn't seem to be overly concerned in February and even in early March when Dr. Fauci told travelers that if they're out on a cruise line to go and enjoy themselves. And remember, Dr. Fauci also told people they can hook up on sex on their smartphone apps in early April. So a lot of confusing so-called expert advice being given to the president. And one more thing, Anand, we don't have a parliamentary system here like we have in Europe, for instance. We have a federal republic, and ultimately all of the economic powers in the United States rely on the judgment of the governors. The governors themselves are the ones who are most responsible piecemeal for the COVID response. And when Andrew Cuomo and Gavin Newsom were asking for ventilators, asking for hospitals, they said President Trump gave them everything they needed. So it's not as if we have some dictatorial fiat in the White House where he issues commands and things are done. He has to work as well as governors want to cooperate and collaborate with him. But ultimately, this is a matter of how the governors have succeeded. And if we start in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, we see absolute failure.
Isn't that one of the problems, John, the fact that governors have this power? There are 50 states, 50 governors, and that's why there's been something of a patchwork response to it.
I don't think it's a problem, and I think it's what's special about the United States. We're not like other countries. It's not a perfect system. There are many imperfections, and in a case like this, there are probably very important lessons to be learned because, let's face it, there likely will be future pandemics, hopefully very far in the future. But if there are, we'll have lessons learned from this experience and see if we have better coordination to address the public health needs.
Hamza Khan, we hear some analysts say, in respect of this election, that not being Trump is not enough for Joe Biden to win this election. He's got to come up with some policies that would excite the base, that would, drive voters to his side. I mean, if you listen to something like healthcare, Medicare for all, overwhelming support for that in the United States. Joe Biden says he doesn't support that. He didn't say anything much about a new Green Deal. He's not talked a lot about immigration. Again, are these lost opportunities for him?
We are a country of 50 states, like your other guest just mentioned, and that means that you have to run in our system, an electoral college system, in 50 different elections. And so Joe Biden is trying to make sure that he has the most broad space base possible in order to win the election. Frankly, at this time, in the middle of the summer, when the news waves are focused on the fact that everyday Americans are dying at the hands of COVID-19, with a president who absolutely doesn't do anything about it aside from rant and rave, he actually hasn't even gotten a briefing from Dr. Fauci in 2 months, which seems a bit odd. I think that Joe Biden's strategy for slowly releasing exciting things to the base as we get towards October and November, I think that makes a lot more sense. We have to remember that August is the doldrums here in the media cycle and in politics in the United States. So with August just around the corner, us just getting out of July 4, and we're still knee-deep, if not neck-deep, in a global pandemic, Joe Biden's campaign strategy is fairly sound.
Thanos, Dimadis, I want to talk about one of the issues that I mentioned, that is immigration. I mean, there are a lot of people who believe that it was this issue that put Donald Trump in the White House in 2016. He believes in tough immigration policies, and he believes it's going to be a winner for him again. In fact, if you look at the administration's latest action, they are now forcing foreign students to leave the country if there are no in-person classes that are going to be held at universities. I mean, what are we to make of this?
Yeah, that's true. And I have to say that we are also very concerned at the Association of Foreign Correspondents because we do give scholarships to foreign journalists to come here to the US to pursue their master's degree. And we know that they are facing huge challenges. And what I see here is, I would say, a game, it says, between Donald Trump, the American administration, the government, and the schools, the universities on the other side, and in the middle, the students and, the human lives. Because Donald Trump, of course, wants to push universities and schools to open as part of his plan to reopening the economy and to liberate the states that he placed as a platform months ago at the beginning of this virus crisis. But on the other side, there are several challenges, there are concerns, there are risks, there are danger in place about how these people, these students who are going to go in the universities in September, are going to manage this virus and protect themselves, and how the universities and the schools will reassure the protection and the safety of their students and pupils. So I don't think that, we have an American presidency right now, which is 4 months before the elections, and what they are trying to do is to, first of all, create a political impression that makes sense for Trump's political strategy. But on the other side, I don't see that the American presidency, the American administration takes seriously the safety and the importance of safety and protection of the human lives. And we experienced that over the last 4 months. We've seen a president who is sending messages to millions of people about, it's not so important to wear a mask, or the COVID is something that can come now and may leave later. But all this unprofessional, inconsistent, and inefficient, and I would say very dangerous strategy of handling a pandemic, I think that makes the United States, to the eyes of the rest of the world, as a country that doesn't know where it goes and doesn't have a strategy at all, and puts at risk human lives.
John, what do you make of that? Those are pretty serious indictments against the president there, that he doesn't care for human life. I mean, if you take the issue of, the student issue, what the White House is essentially doing here is forcing students to self-deport, isn't he?
I don't see it that way necessarily, Anand. And first of all, every country has the right to decide who stays in the country and who doesn't. So to be in the United States, if you're a non-citizen, is not a right, it's a privilege. But I think what we have here is really a matter, let's be clear about the executive order that's being considered. It's a matter of colleges that are fully online. The schools that provide for some in-person classes, those students can stay in the United States.
Right.
But if Harvard University decides that they're going to charge $60,000 or $70,000 a student and have everyone online, the administration's thinking is those students don't need to be in the United States. And there are options. They can transfer to schools that do have some in-person classes. And there's actually a third way, and I think some innovative colleges will approach this, where young people who are almost completely asymptomatic and have a near zero fatality rate. I mean, the health risk is to some of the compromised teachers and faculty members and administrators, barely negligible for the students. But I think if you have students that are able to attend campuses and then have immunocompromised teachers and faculty in another room where they're by themselves delivering a lecture by video cam, that's an innovative way to solve this problem without ejecting students and also allowing for schools to provide very innovative programming.
Hamza Khan, what do you make of what John has just told us? And one other thing is, if Joe Biden becomes president after the November election, can we see him quickly reverse these decisions?
First of all, let me just start with saying that I think that John here is woefully uninformed when it comes to how dangerous COVID-19 is. I was on the phone earlier today with several doctors at George Washington University Hospital who made it very clear that the threat to people who are millennials and otherwise healthy still remains fairly high, and it would not be advisable at this time for most universities in the United States to have classes in person of any type or form. The decision by the Trump administration to cause, as you put it, Anand, young people to self-deport represents, again, a harsh and frankly irrational policy against immigration, which is only going to do harm to the United States down the road. It is very possible, given the confirmation by the Supreme Court of just how much power the president has over our borders, that if Joe Biden, God willing, becomes the next president of the United States, he can quickly reverse these policies and should. This country is built on immigrants. The idea that we should be trying to deport young people who are coming from across the world, from nations and tribes, to be part of the American dream and the American learning experience, it simply weakens us as a country and, frankly, only plays into our enemy's hands, which is surprising that anybody would try and justify that, especially if they are a patriotic American.
All right, let me give John, if you could respond to that very quickly, and I want to get on to Paulo after that.
Look, I'm not going to get into a debate about the epistemology here of COVID. I think there's a very healthy debate to be had here.
A doctor.
Pardon me?
You shouldn't, because you're not a doctor or a scientist.
Neither are you. So let's be clear about all of this. Look, let's keep the ad hominem attacks out of the way. The bottom line here is that I think part of the president's strategy is also to send another message to China. China has the preponderance of foreign students that are here in the United States, China and India for that matter. And I think part of this is also to make sure that there aren't universities here that, let's face it, have not been very friendly to the president, to be able to charge full cash $70,000, $80,000 a year to international students who are here. And again, if there's not a compelling reason for them to be here, the president's thinking is, why have them here? And this forces the schools, it incentivizes them to devise innovative programs so that they do have a reason to stay here. They are attending class, but why have 1 million students in the United States if they're sitting at home watching TV?
John, is that a way of forcing the universities to reopen?
It's an incentive for them to create innovative programs, Anand, rather than simply slap on another, let's have an online year for the next year. And it's also political, Anand. About 70% of parents want to see schools reopen, K through 12, and have their young sons and daughters attending college, especially when they're on hock for hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not learning the right way if they're sitting at home. And that's a fact.
All right, Paulo Sotero, I've just got a couple of minutes left. I want to turn back to Latin America. You were talking earlier on about the situation in Brazil, the coronavirus epidemic there. Brazil has the second highest number of cases in the world. It certainly has the highest number in Latin America. The president himself, Jair Bolsonaro, has been infected. In fact, the governor of Sao Paulo stated that they're fighting two viruses in Brazil. One is the coronavirus and the other one is the Bolsonaro virus. Why has the country fared so badly?
Well, you know, the system has responded up to a point, but the problem there is has overwhelmed the system already. There are states in Brazil that have lost the capacity to respond. This will have enormous consequences in the country. As you may imagine, Trump is not that popular in Brazil or anywhere in Latin America. The United States really has lost its soft power. President Trump is a man that likes to create and promote instability, which is very unusual to see in an American president. And let me just, one observation. I am a faculty, adjunct faculty at George Washington University. The university is taking all the precautions to welcome the students and do a hybrid of classes and at distance. I think that the administration should trust the universities to make those decisions.
We're going to have to leave it there. We have run out of time. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks to everyone for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.